Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Eliot Parker about his new release, Double Crossed. Welcome, Eliot.
Hello, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So Eliot is an author, a professor, and a podcaster. You've got a whole bunch of hats to wear. So tell me about your being a professor. You're at Ole Miss, is that right?
That's right. I'm at Ole Miss. I teach mostly business and technical writing courses and sometimes creative writing courses. I've been here since 2018 and really enjoy it. Really enjoy living in the South and being a part of the Ole Miss community.
I love it. And before we started recording, Eliot and I were talking about the fact that my degree is in technical writing and not creative writing. And we don't meet so many of those of us who concentrate in technical writing. But it has stood me well. I told Eliot before, I can fire someone and they'll send me a thank you note. It's a gift.
That's right. And we can do it in such a way that you don't really realize you're being fired until you kind of sit down and read it 2 or 3 times and think about it. And you think, oh, Dan's firing me.
That's right. We're coming to the end of our rope here.
Right.
So, wonderful. And you also are the host of an award-winning podcast, Now Appalachia. So give the audience a little idea about what your podcast is about.
Sure. It's carried on the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, which a lot of folks are familiar with. That's the radio network and the podcasting network that Pam Stack runs. And we've been doing the podcast, my gosh, since 2016 or 17. So we were up to 7 or 8 years now. And we profile mostly authors and publishers with connections to Appalachia. That could be connections involving having lived there, grown up there, gone to school there, have family that are there, have visited there at various points. And, you know, we started the podcast, Dan, because that was an area of literature that had really been underexposed and had not been really covered and profiled a lot. And once we started doing the podcast, and what I've discovered from doing those podcasts is how many wonderful authors and wonderful books, award-winning literature is coming out of Appalachia by these Appalachian authors and is consequently being produced by these great Appalachian publishers. So it's a great experience and an honor to get to profile these authors and publishers because they're doing some outstanding work, and we get a chance to talk to them about it and kind of share this work with not only people in the United States, but all over the world.
Yes, and it's a wonderful podcast, Eliot. I commend you on it. And it is important because we need to shine a light on all voices. You know, it's so easy for, say, somebody from North Carolina to think somebody from South Carolina is so different. You know, these are the kind of internal prejudice we grow up with. We think this person is better than that one. But there's so many wonderful voices coming out of Appalachia, out of the South, out of the North, everywhere. And it's nice to have somebody who highlights them. So I commend you on your work with that.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about Double Crossed. Give the audience an overview about what Double Crossed is about.
Sure. This is book 3 in my Ronan McCullough thriller series, and it's set in Charleston, West Virginia, where I'm from and where I grew up. This is the cover of the book, and you showed it a moment ago, but I thought I would show it again. I'm pleased to mention that it won the American Writing Award for 2024 for mystery and thriller novel. So I was honored to have that award. So that's what that little eye sticker there is for. But this book is about Ronan McCullough, who is a police detective, police sergeant in Charleston, West Virginia. This book picks up, about 6 weeks. Well, not really 6 weeks, about 6 days actually, after the incidents in A Knife's Edge, which was the second book in the series, concluded. And Ronan is on medical leave. He's on not self-imposed, but mandatorily imposed medical leave as he's trying to recover mentally and physically from what happened at A Knife's Edge. And he comes across a situation in which there is the charred body of a dead federal agent on the west side of Charleston, and he's an agent affiliated with the Department of Homeland Security. And so Ronan's got to figure out, you know, what's an agent for Homeland Security doing in Charleston, first of all? What's he doing on the west side, and what happened to him? Who would do this to him? And then at the same time, across town, as he's investigating that, there's a large explosion. there is a stern wheel regatta going on down by the Kanawha River, which is right there in downtown Charleston, and there's an explosion that sets fire to a lot of the paddle wheels and stern wheeler boats that are docked there for the festival, for the event. And so he's got to figure out, are these incidents connected? Are these two separate things? Was the explosion that happened on the Kanawha River accidental, or was it connected in some way? And ultimately what happens, Dan, is he gets embroiled in this cryptocurrency scandal, in which there is a set of numbers that a lot of people want access to. And there's a reason they want access to it for a lot of different reasons. But the challenge for Ronan is this is not a physical suspect he can put his hands on. I mean, he's essentially chasing a bunch of numbers on a computer. And so this is totally new for him, because he's used to, putting his hands on a physical person, that is suspected of committing a crime. And now all of a sudden he's chasing a bunch of numbers, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. Really, none of his partners or anybody in the department knows what's going on and kind of what they're doing. And so as he kind of keeps chasing down these numbers and what they mean, he starts to peel back the layers of what's really going on, who wants these numbers, why they want these numbers, and how it's connected to that explosion and the dead federal agent that he finds at the beginning of the story. So there's a lot going on there, but and a lot for Ronan to get put through. But I wanted to write it, Dan, because I've been fascinated by cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all of this. And I read so many articles and watched podcasts, or listened to podcasts, watched documentaries, read books, and listened to experts. I still don't really understand what it is and kind of how it works. But one of the things that caught my attention is I heard a lot of people that were being interviewed saying this is a way that organized crime can move money untraced and unavailable to be tracked by Interpol and the FBI and all of these law enforcement agencies, because there's no regulation. There's no regulatory body that oversees it. And so that got me thinking, well, what if you had that as the main suspect of a thriller novel? And how would you go about tracking that down and finding out who's responsible? So that's kind of where the Bitcoin cryptocurrency aspect of the plot worked in there. It's just my own personal fascination, but it was really fun to put a character like Ronan through that, where he's chasing this set of numbers and trying to find out why they're important.
Well, and it sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole myself, as in reading your book, because I thought, well, when cryptocurrency first came around, I do accounting for a day job. So, I've been familiar with numbers and money my entire career. And one of the things that I remember from reading history is that we've had a lot of laws passed regarding currency in this country, especially after the Civil War. And for the next, say, 50 or 60 years, we kept having all of these laws enacted to protect us. So I got down a little rabbit hole with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which basically limited currency to the US dollar. And when cryptocurrency first came out, I kept thinking to myself, I don't understand why this isn't being shut down. Because if I sell this piece of artwork behind me, someone would give me cash for it. I'd have that cash in my hand. But cryptocurrency sort of is out in the ether somewhere. I remember a client said he made $40,000 in cryptocurrency and some transfers. And I said, well, did you get your cash? And he's like, oh, no, it just stays out there. And I'm like, but you didn't make jack. All you made was paper. Or someone said it was worth this. And I'm not surprised organized crime is involved with this, because anytime there's a shady deal to be made, organized crime is right there to capitalize on it. So any idea why it's not being shut down? I know that you may not be the person to ask, but I am always curious about that. Why hasn't the government moved to put a halt to this?
That's a great question. And that's one that through all the research that I did, I never really solved. And I'm so glad you mentioned the Currency Act of 1913 and going back even into the 19th century. I just finished a few weeks ago, Lindsay Chervinsky's wonderful book. She's a historian at SMU and the president of the George Washington Historical Association. She just wrote a terrific new book on John Adams and his presidency. And one of the things that even back then, Adams and Alexander Hamilton were fighting over was currency, and how was currency going to be regulated. And Adams wanted a more sort of restricted currency model that was going to be overseen by Congress and the government. And Alexander Hamilton wanted more of just a sort of a freestyle, free-willing currency that anybody could have and access to and trade and whatever. So we've been having that discussion, really for a long time. That's an excellent book if you're a historian or like John Adams or like revolutionary history. I would recommend it because it's all in there. But so we've been having this discussion for a long time, and I think part of the problem is, and one of the things that I explore in the book, even though it's fiction, is that you can get in and out of this cryptocurrency game so quickly. And the only thing that really identifies you in this cryptocurrency market is a name. And it's almost like a username. Like, we used to have those old AOL Instant Messenger usernames from back in the 90s, early 2000s. You might be Squeaky 1982 or whatever. Well, that same username is what identifies you in this crypto world. And all of these people that are trading and selling and using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, the only thing they know you by is that screen name. Well, if you decide you don't want to be Squeaky 1982 anymore, you can change your name. And suddenly that old profile of Squeaky 1982 is gone, and now you're somebody else. And so I think that's what makes it difficult to track, is that, these agencies that are trying to follow this, it's so easy for organized crime to change names, change accounts. It used to be everybody back in the 80s. Everybody got their, when the cocaine wars were going on and the war on drugs, everybody shipped all their money off to the Cayman Islands. And because that couldn't be tracked, well, then law enforcement figured out a way to track that money. Didn't mean they could get it back, but at least they could pin it to you and say, hey, this drug money is your account in the Cayman Islands. Well, they can't do that with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, at least yet. I mean, I think, we will get to a point where it is going to be able to be tracked. But for right now, it is so easy to get in and out of the game as a trader, if you're trying to do it for nefarious purposes, that it's very difficult to track. And kind of once your profile is gone, it's gone forever. And to kind of build on that point, Dan, you might remember a few years ago, and this also kind of got me interested in this idea of having cryptocurrency and Bitcoin as a plot for a novel, a thriller especially. There was the guy, and I don't remember where he lives, out in the Midwest somewhere, who had, I think, $10 or $20 million in Bitcoin, and it was password protected, and he couldn't remember his password. And it was down to the last try. And I still don't really know how this works, but if he entered it in and was wrong on that last try, he would not have access. And he was wrong. He couldn't get the money. He couldn't get the 20 million he had invested. And so he was profiled. I think the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post did a story on this. And they asked him, they said, are you not going to try? And he said, no. He said, I can't remember what it is. And he said, at least I know that maybe someday, if I'll remember it down the road or it comes to me, I can try it. But he said, if I'm wrong, I'll never be able to get to it. So there's all these complexities and all these things about it that, I think even people that are engaged in it don't totally understand. But for right now, the fact that you can get in and out of it so quickly and totally remove your identity from the forum and the platform makes it hard to track for law enforcement.
Well, and that's what I kept thinking of, Eliot. I kept thinking, golly, I know this is going to sound a little bit like a conspiracy theory, but I think that the higher ups in government have a responsibility to all of us, not just to themselves, but it's almost as if they turn a blind eye to something that they know organized crime is going to be involved in. Because if you're tying the hands of the local police department and maybe even the state police department because you want your friends to be able to trade currency, you're not doing this country a service. And honestly, I really thought during the Biden administration, for some odd reason, I thought he was going to put an end to it. But that has not happened yet. Maybe before January, but who knows? But I think it was such a novel concept because I thought, wow, you've hit on something that is not mined, so to speak, before. So, I mean, I think this is the first time I've seen crypto being the driving force in a novel.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to do something. I appreciate you mentioning that, Dan. And I wanted to do something different because, as you know, I know you're a big thriller reader, as am I. And, there have been so many things that have been done over and over again in thriller novels. And every genre has their tropes, but there's so many things that are done in thriller novels that are, very similar. And that's perfectly okay. But I wanted to do something different, something that hadn't been done before, something that hadn't been explored pretty explicitly. And I found cryptocurrency to be that, again, connected to my own kind of interest and fascination by it. But I also feel like as a writer, I want to do something with every book that I write that I did not do in the previous book. Even if I'm writing a series about the same set of characters, I want to do something in the book that I didn't do in the previous book. And I want to challenge myself as a writer. So, and I love research. I love the research part of writing, but this research was the most intense I've ever done for anything that I've ever written. And I mean, literally, I could share a picture with you of my desk in my office just piled high with books and transcripts and forms and video clips of things that I had watched and read. But it was a great learning experience too, because I felt like I learned a lot, even though I don't have all the answers, and I'm still kind of like, well, I don't really know quite how that works. It was a great learning experience, and I feel like I'm a better researcher now as a writer going forward. But it was fun to write about something, to learn something as a writer and incorporate that in the thriller, but to do something to challenge myself, do something I had never done before, and try to do something that adds a new dimension or a new twist to the genre of thriller novels. So it was a lot of fun to write the book.
I love that. So are you an organic writer, or are you a plotter?
I do a little bit of plotting. I certainly don't do the James Patterson plotting method. I took his master class a few years ago. It was a Christmas gift from my mom, and he does these really intricate 18 to 19 page outlines where he knows on chapter 4 the color of a character's shirt even before he's written that chapter or that character. I don't do nearly that, but I do use Post-it notes, and I kind of have a little a storyboard that I use, and so I have, pink Post-it notes for character issues, green is setting, blue is plot, yellow may be, secondary characters or role characters that are going to come in and out. And so, I'm a very visual person. And so I use that a lot to and I move those notes around on my storyboard as I'm going and take things off and add things and move things around. That helps me stay organized. But so I have a general idea, when I start a book, kind of how it's going to begin, how it's going to end, and what are some of the major, plot points. If you think about that plot chart that we're all familiar with, some of those major steps on the plot arc. I mean, I have a general sense of that, but I really don't pigeonhole myself and say, okay, by chapter 3, this has to happen, or this conversation between these two characters is definitely going to happen in chapter 7, and it's not only going to happen there, it's not going to happen anywhere else. Because I find that sometimes when you just you put your mind in a scene and you get into those characters' minds and their heads, and you get into this tenuous situation you've put them in, you'll be amazed at where your mind just creatively takes the story and takes the chapter or the scene. And those have been some of my favorite moments as a writer. And I look back and think, gosh, I'm so glad I just kind of let my mind roll with it that particular day, because I ended up with a chapter that I felt like was pretty strong. So I'm sort of in the middle. I don't write from the seat of my pants, but I don't do these really intricate James Patterson 20-page outlines, because to me, it's like a math equation. You start getting into the, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, number 1, number 2, small letter A, small letter B, and it's like solving the quadratic equation from algebra 2. And so I don't want to do that. I want my writing to be, more creative and more free flowing. So using that storyboard method works well for me.
Well, and I do find, to use your analogy, that conversation that is supposed to be in chapter 7, if it really does fit into chapter 9, it is okay, because you may know that you want your characters to have this conversation, but they need to have it when it's really truly time to have it, not just because you had it next to number 7. At least that's my opinion anyway. So, and I think as a reader, I find the same thing. There are times where you read something that it was intentionally put in a certain place, but you don't always feel like that's where it should be as a reader. It doesn't make me quit a book, but it does sometimes make me question, because I'm like, okay, this might have felt a little more natural over here, but then I didn't write it. So it's not, I keep that to myself.
Man, understand that. So it's like no skin off my nose. I just, turn the page.
That's it. I'm invested in being entertained first and foremost. That's my biggest thing. So I love the character of Nick. You give us someone who's younger. I think everyone, as we age, there have been many times in my life where I say, I need a 14-year-old to figure out this app on my phone. So it was nice to see an intergenerational setting in your book. Was that something that was important to you as an author, to do some intergenerational work?
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I wanted that. And I think through Nick, you see a different side of Ronan and a different side of Ty than maybe you would have seen had he not been there. And going back to the series, Nick shows up unannounced in the first book in the series, which is called Fragile Brilliance. And Ronan's in the midst of this investigation where a teenager gets jumped and beat up pretty badly at a downtown sports bar in Charleston. And then Ronan is subsequently attacked and brutally beaten after he tries to break up the fight. And so while he's trying to figure all this out, then all of a sudden Nick shows up at his door and he says, "I'm coming to live with you." And Nick and his mother are estranged. Ronan and his sister, who's Nick's mother, Melissa, they are all estranged. And Melissa has been remarried. Her Nick's new stepfather is a very wealthy man that owns a lot of real estate in Florida. But he doesn't want anything to do with Nick. He doesn't consider Nick, his problem, his issue. And so Nick's kind of had enough of it. And the only relative he has left is Ronan, and he shows up on the doorstep. And so, what's interesting is, Ty takes an immediate like to Nick, and they get along really, really well. And I think that's a fun relationship to explore. But then Ronan's sort of like, I have no idea what to do with a teenager. I don't have children. I haven't raised children. I have no idea what to do with this teenager who I haven't seen in years. He comments in Fragile Brewing. He said, "I haven't seen you since you were like 10 years old. I don't even know what you're interested in, what you like, and all that." And so as that book unfolds, as The Knife Edge unfolds, and certainly in Double Crossed as well, we see that relationship unfold. And what we've learned is that Nick is a pretty savvy computer guy. He's really into computers and technology, which is an area of Ronan's life that he's not very strong in. And at the same time, Ronan is so concerned about making sure that Ty and Nick stay out of the professional side of his life, to protect them, not only to protect the relationship that Ronan has with Ty, but also to just kind of keep them from being targets and to keep them from being possible pawns in his investigation used by the criminals he's investigating. But, Nick, being this sort of nosy teenager, young adolescent that he is, can't help himself but sticking his nose into things. And, it annoys Ronan in Double Crossed at first that Nick's kind of involved, but then he comes to appreciate his skills and his expertise when they start chasing these crypto numbers and trying to find out who they belong to and what they're up to. And of course, Nick is a little neck deep up into his own little crypto cyber currency problems himself, which Ronan has to deal with. But I just love that. I love the interplay and the relationship that they have, because Ronan clearly loves Nick, and Nick loves Ronan. And I think Nick looks up to Ronan in a lot of ways. But you have this situation where there's many times Ronan wants to strangle Nick, but he also wants to give him a hug at the same time. And and then Ty's kind of the buffer. Ty kind of steps in and says, "Look, Ronan, he's just trying to help. Look, Ronan, he's only 20. You got to remember, he's
That's right.
He's not wildly and wise and worldly like you are." So that is really, I think, I didn't really anticipate that being a real avenue into Ronan and Ty's characters, but you see a different side of both of them when he's involved and when he's in scenes where all three of them are together, just the conversations that they have and how they interrelate to each other. Those are some of my best scenes and favorite scenes to write, because I get to go back to being that 20-year-old that I was not too long ago, and and do things and have Nick do and say things that kind of make Ronan just be like, what? So it's a good way to keep all those characters on their toes.
I like it. And, we have all been a certain age at some point in our life, as, and as we age, it's important not to forget where we've been. There's some things, I might've been a lot bolder at 20 than I am at my age now. And it's nice to be able to lean into that. And maybe you could say naive as well, because, once you've lived longer, you've got a more lived experience. But it's also nice to see that youth on the page, especially when it's how they get along with people in the next generation up, because it is important. We have to pass the baton to those behind us and try to help them along. And then also let them remind us of wonderment, if I might. When you're younger, you have a lot of wonderment in your mind and in your heart. And sometimes as we age, we become a little bitter and jaded. I'll raise my hand. So
same here. I'll do the same. Yes.
So you also write a series with a female lead. Is that correct? Do you alternate them, or?
Oh, that's a great question. I've got the rough, sort of the very rough storyboarding outline of the next book, and that series that you're talking about features a Cleveland, Ohio police detective. Her name's Stacy Tabbett. The first book in that series is called Code for Murder. The second book is called A Final Call. And that's set in Cleveland, Ohio, where a lot of my dad's family lived and worked. Growing up, they worked in the steel mills up there, the shipyards. They worked at the rubber plant there in Akron outside of Cleveland. So we'd go up there and visit them a lot. And so Cleveland's a great city to set sort of a crime series in. But yeah, I've got the rough outline of the third book in the Stacy series, but I've been away from her for a while. It took me about almost 3 years to write Double Crossed because I'd spent so much time doing the research. So I've been kind of heavily in Ronan's world for a while, but now I'm ready to step out of that and to step back into Stacy's world, which is similar in some ways, but very different. She obviously is dealing with, a major metropolitan city and all the, problems that creates in terms of geographics and population and logistics and all of that. And she's a different character than Ronan in that she's very much a type A personality like Ronan, but she is also a little more collaborative. She tends to work within the structures of the law enforcement apparatus, where Ronan kind of gets annoyed with that sometimes and just goes on his own and kind of functions as a rogue officer outside the limits, which gets him in trouble and gets, his colleagues and his captain upset with him, where Stacy kind of works within those boundaries and is more collaborative and more leans on her partner, Austin Serrera, and some of the other people in the Cleveland Police Department. But she's in a bad spot at the end of a final call. And so I've got to get her out of that bad spot she was in. I don't want to give the spoiler away, but she solves the investigation of a good friend of hers' son who's gone missing. And she eventually finds him and finds out why he went missing. There's a variety of things involved there. But, writing her has been a lot of fun. Writing that kind of a character writing a female character from my perspective in that kind of a genre has been a lot of fun. But I'm ready to get back and spend some time with Stacy. It's been a while. I'm ready to kind of put Ronan to the side. I've got more things in store for him, but ready to sort of put him aside and get back to spending some time with Stacy in her world a little bit.
It's her turn, so to speak.
It is her turn, yes. She's been grossly neglected, and now we're gonna bring her back.
she's tired of her vacation. I get it.
Yes, very much.
So, Eliot, do you have a website or social media you'd like to share with the audience?
I do. It's just my name, www.eliotparker.com, 1L1T, ELIOTPARKER.com. There you've got information about Double Crossed and the Stacy Tavitt series and my other books as well. There's a contact form if you ever have any questions or ever want to chat about writing, or if there's anything I can do to help folks out there with their writing and publishing journey, feel free to contact me there. But yeah, so feel free. I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, all those platforms. So feel free to reach out. It's just my name, Eliot Parker. So feel free to reach out to me there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, and best of luck with Double Crossed.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.